my speech today is, first of all, I'm going to give you a characterization of what developed countries are like. Second, I'm going to give you an overview of immigration policies. Third, we're going to look at the advantages of looser immigration policies, and all of this is to support our goal to encourage immigration to developed countries. So first of all, let's talk about what developed countries are like. And so developed countries are high-income countries. So we're going to look at, like, for example, countries in Europe, the USA. Here in Asia, we can look at Japan, Taiwan, the country that we're in now, Korea, countries like this. All right, so these countries, these countries have high levels of social benefits. If you look at the USA, for example, you have Social Security. If you look at Taiwan, where we are now, we have national health insurance, best health insurance program in the world. You have free university in Germany. And so another thing that comes with these developed countries are they're also highly educated people, especially highly educated women. They often start families very, very late. There's often a very low birth rate. So for example, you look at Taiwan, we are under replacement level. Japan is under replacement level, and Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world. And so, combined with this low birth rate, we also have an aging population. And so, everybody's looking at this time bomb that's coming up. In China, they have a time bomb. Like Xi Jinping can only attack us within the next 20 years or something like that before people age out. He doesn't have enough people in his army. Here in Taiwan, we have this growing crisis as there's not going to be a large enough population to support the people who have retired. Right? And so overall, what's happening is that you have a smaller and smaller percentage of working people who are going to be supporting a larger and larger number of retired people. And so one thing that we could do is we could loosen immigration policy. So let's take a look at immigration policies that we might have right now. So for example, sometimes you have a pay-to-immigrant policy where you have to contribute maybe, or invest maybe like $1 million or $2 million or $5 million, or Trump is maybe asking for like $25 million to get a passport to the country. You also have relative immigration. You can bring your relatives in. You also sometimes have a lottery. And then sometimes there are also stipulations to immigration. For example, here in Taiwan, one of the barriers to immigration is that me as a U.S. citizen or I as a U.S. citizen have to give up my passport in order to get Taiwanese citizenship. And so this puts like a big barrier on me to want to immigrate and become a citizen of Taiwan. Right, so when we're talking about immigration policies, we can say there's some kind of combination of these different policies. But you can see our motion, this is not a this House would motion, this is a this House believes that. So we're not going to work on any kind of model, but we're just going to talk about you generally want to pass some kind of policy that's going to encourage immigration, but we're not going to define it carefully.
Could you please specify to what extent you're going to loosen these immigration policies? Please tell us how.
All right. So what we want to do is we want to change these policies in order to encourage immigration. So again, this would be up to every country because every country has a different policy. So you're going to have to go for a case-by-case basis among all these developed countries to figure out what fits best for that country. But in general, what we're saying, if we're part of the legislature of those countries, we're going to say, let's figure out a way to loosen the immigration and encourage immigration in our developed countries. So now the next thing that we need to do is figure out what are the advantages of having immigrants come to our country. So right now, we're in this situation in the world for in the USA, for example, Trump is demonizing immigrants. He's saying that these are bad people, these are rapists, these are criminals who come to our country. But in truth, all of these things are lies. This is not actually what the facts are. In fact, immigrants are not dangerous. Immigrants actually have a lower crime rate than the normal citizen population. Immigrants often take the jobs. Immigrants are beneficial because they take the jobs that often the citizens of developed countries don't want to take. So it could be these farming jobs, it could be like custodial jobs. They're basically these kind of lower paid or minimum paid wage service jobs. Another thing about immigrants is that they have a strong entrepreneurial spirit. And so again, this is another fact we know about immigrants. They're more likely to start their own company, and they're more likely to have this drive to improve themselves and improve their families. So what we can see is by bringing immigrants in, we can increase our workforce. So for these jobs that we don't have enough people to fill in on, immigrants are going to come in. They're going to fill up a lot of blue-collar jobs. And then another important thing about immigrants is they often have a higher birth rate. And so that there are more kids who are raised into your culture, more kids who are going to be loyal to your culture if you invite immigrants into your country. Please.
Looking at the fact that a lot of developed countries have rising rates of unemployment, don't you believe that at one point the citizens will take these jobs?
All right, so there are a lot of people in these developed countries. What I said earlier is that immigrants are very entrepreneurial. So they come to countries and they're the ones who are going to be starting new businesses, and so they're a net benefit to your country. This is a fact. I've seen on Midas Touch, for example, if you need a citation. And so what we see going on with immigrants is they come in and they're going to be the new foundation to pay for social services. They're going to be the new foundation that pays for health services that you want. Another thing is that immigrants often come to a country, or they often go to a highly developed country because they want an education. And so what you want is these highly educated immigrants to stay in your country. They get a degree, often they get a PhD, and then what do you want to do? You want to kick them out, send them back to China, for example, so that they can develop China's tech industry or China's weapon industry. Instead, you want to encourage them to stay in the USA and build up the tech sector in the USA, or build up the tech sector in whichever developed country that is closest to your heart. And so what we can see over here, is that you're going to have more doctors, more researchers coming into your country because they study there and they stay there. This is going to boost the talent level in your country. And so just like one further aside, one just other little benefit is that if you look at the life of the immigrant, you give them a chance to live in a developed country. You give them a chance to better themselves, to not go back to the lesser developed, or the lower developed, the developing country that they came from. That they can have this life that's more of the dream life that they want. And so for these reasons, we think that we should loosen regulations in order to encourage immigrants to come to our developed country, and that's why we propose.
All right, we thank the previous speaker for their speech, and we now welcome here.
The sense from opening opposition is simple. We are not against immigration, but then we are the ones who support on a need-based immigration purposes. For instance, if the government deems that in that particular industry, that particular labor is necessary, we are happy for the companies apply for like work visa or citizenship for that citizen. For that citizen, these policies, and how does it really look like? So I'm going to characterize to you how immigration. We think that these immigration is still going to happen, will still exist under our paradigm. But then, what do we mean by loosen? We're talking about things like maybe you will reduce the requirement of security or background checks of that immigrants, or you will reduce the income requirement from like 10,000 or asset requirement from 10,000 US to like 1,000. And we also talk about you no longer need to give up your passport. You can like be like a dual citizen, both live in the US or in another country, or you do not have to stay for that like immigrated country for a certain period of time, and then you will be entitled to certain kind of social benefits in which like you don't get to enjoy. We think these are the scenarios, or these are the likely policies that are going to be implemented under the paradigm. Why is it so harmful if it really happens, if we loosen the requirement of loosen the requirement? First of all, if we have less background check, that means you're putting the entire country in danger. You're not like we think that it imposes a huge risk to the national security of the country. But secondly, if you loosen the income requirement, let's talk about who will be the people that will be affected by the motion. Like if you loosen the requirement, the rich, they will still immigrate to US. so they are not the main stakeholder in the debate. So who will be the main stakeholder? Will be like the grassroots or even like people with average income. They will be moving to US. So what will happen if this group of people migrate to US? First of all, we think it will create or intensify the existing cultural divide within these developed countries. So in the status quo, we think there's a huge rhetoric in countries like the immigrants are demonized as people who take away the resources, as people who take away the social benefits. And then we also see that these immigrants do not really truly integrate to these immigrated countries like the Chinatown in the United States. We are not talking about, it is not our burden to prove there will be like true integration or like the immigrants will suddenly incorporate into the life. But then we believe that if we have an influx of grassroots immigrants who will migrate to like countries like UK or US, first of all, they are not going to find a job because of like the existing high unemployment rate. But more importantly, how are they going to survive? Very likely, they will be entitled to like black market jobs or even low-paid jobs, which will not able to help them to survive. But more importantly, right, if they will like rely on the social benefits, or like that will increase the government's burden for survival. And then we believe that if we do not loosen the control, who are the people that will migrate? Like people with high-skilled labor, or like those tech companies owners. If we only allow these people, if we hold a high threshold of immigration, we think it gives a harder rhetoric for these conservatives to demonize these immigrants. We think this is how we're going to less intensify the cultural conflict. But more importantly, right, let's look at on principle level, who should we take care of? We think that the citizens, to the citizens, given the fact that all these countries already face a lot of problems like overpopulation, crime rate, and unemployment, all we're not going to simply say, well, these immigrants, they're just less prone to crime. They are just more educated. We think these are all one-liner responses in which they haven't even proven. But even if they have proven, we think this is a meaningless comparison to begin with. Because let's look at who should the countries take care of. We think that the state has the moral duty to these citizens because of the contract they have been signed into, and then the primary duty of the state is to be accountable to the taxpayers and not to its own citizens. If you can't even take care of your own citizens, how are you going to take care of the immigrant? Of course, I'm going to do away. Of course, these free immigrants, that immigration, they have a freedom of movement. But then, we think that the freedom of movement of these citizens have to be trumped when it comes to the benefits of our citizens, which have been like the taxpayers and who has been their own contributor to the society. Therefore, the state owns no duty to take care of citizens, to these immigrants. We think that the state should prioritize its own citizens and to take care of their survival. Moving on to my second substantive. Do we exactly need human beings in the job market in the future? So I think that even though you implement like talent into the market, into US, in a few years' time, with the rise of AI, a lot of the jobs will be replaced by like human beings. Even though you have like high-tech workers, or even you have like workers that have been implemented, in the short term, they may give birth to babies. Of course, you might have more babies. But in the long term, with the advancement of technology, more jobs will be taken by AI. Like jobs like janitors or even teachers, translators will be replaced by AI technology. That's why we think that for a lot of developed countries already start focusing on their development, on the fintech technology and then also the AI technology. Therefore, we think that the necessity of human labor or human capital is already less significant in the short term. In the short term, it may be still the same, but then in the long term, we don't see that like human beings are really that helpful. Sorry, everyone, are really that helpful in the long term. Therefore, what will happen is that in the long term, these people will become like a net burden to the government. Of course, for those high-skilled immigrants or like high-skilled like tech company owners, we think that they will still generate economic growth that will help the countries to boom in the short term. But then when we talk about if you loosen the employment, you just allow everyone to come into the country, we're not sure how beneficial or how contributive these people people will be. And in the long term, if the government do not need them anymore, or like in the long term, we may even need to have universal basic income to take care of these people. So for all these reasons, we are very proud to oppose this.
Thank the previous speaker for this speech. Now applause.
I just want to quickly clarify this context of where exactly why we have this, okay? We are trying to loosen immigration because there are certain markets in certain job sectors that are missing. For example, as my previous speaker might have said that as education gets better, lower level jobs are being taken. And I also want to point out, it's because of the fact that we're not loosening immigration, we have this big problem. For example, in LA, in Los Angeles, California, we have a large amount of illegal immigrants going there, right? Why are they going there, right? They're going there because they are able to find opportunities, legal opportunities, good proper jobs in order to provide for their family. They're going there because they know there's an opportunity for them, right? And this is what we're trying to say. We're trying to say that control is going to benefit all parties. And by doing that, you can loosen the restrictions on what exactly, how should people, what kind of people are going to live into the country. And I'm going to quickly explain what the rebuttal what the opposition side is going to say, right? What they said, okay? So they asked us for explanation of the loosening policy. So I'm going to tell you, we loosen policy on certain job markets that developed countries are missing, right? Whether it's high skill or low skill, we'll also clarify later on. They said they would go to lower security check. That's not true. We're unlikely to lower security check because we still believe that it matters for the country to be safe, right? And then they also said like, oh, you know, there's an investment into getting into the country. I think this is a very different stakeholder. It applies only to rich. But I'm going to talk about how even if you were to say rich people were to invest in the country, it's still invest in the country. It's still better because of the fact that it brings economic growth into the country, right? And then they talk about this dual citizenship, all right? Passports aren't going to be handed out like candy, right? There is methods that developing countries implement in order to prove that this immigrant is contributing to society. For example, in Switzerland, if you are there, you have and you're working in a certain place, your employer, your people in the community, they kind of vote saying like, yes, we actually think this person has been helping us, is a valuable member of society. Therefore, we do believe that they need to be involved into this thing, right? So I also want to bring up the second point of the different stakeholders very, very quickly. The idea of low-skilled workers, right? We are going to bring low-skilled workers if we need low-skilled workers because as developed countries, like might be shortage, but I also want to point out all these workers we bring in, the other thing that we benefit is the fact that we are able to tax them to also contribute to our aging population and so that they can actually support the society. I'll take a point in a minute. I also want to talk about this high skill worker. What happens if you're this great genius people, right? I'm not going to say, we're not going to say that every single high school person in one country is going to immigrate to the place. It's more likely that only the exceptional people that are really good in whatever market industry they're in are going to be given this opportunity to stay within wherever they are. Okay? I'll take a point.
Yeah, okay, so what's the difference you're making? Developed countries already take people in areas where they lack them, such as H-1B for skilled workers in the US, or I don't know, a lot of immigrants that do work on construction in the US. Where's the difference?
So we're trying to point out that the fact that because of these tight restrictions, you have these legal immigrants that are entering into these countries, where what you should be doing is giving this opportunity by saying like, look, we know we have this issue with this industry, you should come in legally, don't come into the country illegally. We're giving this incentive, and it also brings up this fact that like opening opposition was saying like, oh, we demonize illegal immigrants, right? But we also have this contradiction where you have people like, yeah, we need to demonize illegal immigrants, but they're also hardworking, good people. And we're trying to prove like why there's a big controversy in California is because of the fact there is a majority of these people that are being demonized, they're illegal immigrants, but they are actually working good jobs, they're filling in gaps in the job market. And this is what we're trying to say, right? We're trying to say that in order if you want to demonize illegal immigrants, right? We have this thing where if you loosen the policies where we get registered people and more control over who exactly comes to the country, we are more likely to, it is more better and more justified to demonize illegal immigrants because they are most likely trying to hide entering to these markets or whatever the case may be. I also want to talk about this idea of how people might say, oh, we might lose people in developed countries. But even if we were to say that, okay, like I said earlier, like the skilled workers, we only take the best. But even if we were to say, like, the skilled workers do come back, skilled or unskilled workers, they do work in developed countries, it's very likely that they also will probably send money to developing countries, which also helps them growing their economy. For example, the Philippines, the Indonesian population, where they actually use this methodology to outsource jobs to other countries and stuff like that. I also want to bring back, I'll give it in a minute. I also want to mention of this other argument that opposition mentioned in terms of like, oh, there's AI and the fact that, people are not going to be there. But my point, the point that we're trying to point out is one of the things that we also are able to do as legal immigrants is the fact that they're able to pay taxes too, right? And also like the fact that even if we are talking about the future of AI and whether or not it comes up and down, okay, sure.
How can, if the immigrants will bring back the income to the developing countries that they are originally from, how are they going to create economic activities in the countries that they have migrated into?
Paying taxes, because the fact is that's what we're trying to say, right? If you have more immigrants into these developing countries, you have a larger population, you are able to tax them, unlike if you were to have this other problem at the moment. So I also want to talk about, like, this is exactly why, even if you, on your side, you were saying, like, jobs are being overtaken or replaced, the fact is that if we are lucid we are controlling in the market better, so it gives less incentives for illegal immigration, and also gives a much better control for the government, and also this takes away this idea of how, oh, illegal immigrants or immigrants are taking away resources. No, because these immigrants are also paying taxes, they contribute to society. It's the problem of the fact that we can't distinguish illegal immigrants and the fact that who is actually criminal and who is actually trying to make a living and improve the society. And this is where we believe we win on this debate, because at the end of the day, all parties, like I mentioned, benefits. And for all those reasons, I come to controls.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the speech. Now,
arguments from side opening government is that, well, we can collect tax benefits from these means. A couple of responses, right? Number one, if you attract low-skilled workers, I don't know what kind of tax you can actually tax from them, right? Because they are basically low-skilled and below the tax scheme anyway. But even if they are somehow able to collect, earn some income, they are more likely going to bring back their income back to the home country instead of, contributing their country, their money to the economy that they immigrated to. So it's basically no benefit to your home economy. But secondly, for those who are rich enough to pay taxes, they are likely already able to immigrate under the status quo, even without loosening the immigration policy, right? Because their investment are deemed necessary to the country's development because, for example, they have created sufficient job opportunities for America, for example, and hence they are already able to immigrate to the United States under the status quo. You don't need to loosen your immigration policies. But what happens if you loosen immigration policies is that you are going to attract those who are more grassroots, those who are not that privileged, right? Those are the persons that we think that greater problems will be caused on their side of the house, and I'm going to explain later in my speech. But the second idea about on-site opening government is on aging population. Right, my partner has already told you that we don't have the need to have a large workforce under the status quo when AI has already been taking over a lot of job opportunities. I as a lawyer and also very worried that my job will be taken by AI one day, right? We have robots to do cleaning, we have robots to do chefs, and we have AI to do a lot of work for us. So what you are attracting by loosening immigration policies are those grassroots immigrants. who enter the workforce who may not be well trained and who are not able to well connected in the United States or developed countries, and hence what you are going to create is more unemployment and burden the social welfare system more, and you also cause more cultural antagonism because these immigrants are likely seen as outsiders coming to our country to steal our jobs, and hence these immigrants are likely to be stigmatized as someone who comes here to invade us and take away our resources. We think that it actually harms the country itself and also harms the immigrants themselves, which I'm going to further explain in my speech. The second idea is that even if there's an aging population, you can also encourage birth rate, right? The benefits of encouraging birth rate over immigration is that you avoid the problem of cultural assimilation difficulties, because the child that is given birth by citizens is raised by citizens who live in the country locally, and hence will be culturally similar to the greater society that he lives in, and hence there will be a smaller barrier of assimilation and smaller barrier of them being scapegoated as someone who invades our countries and steal our resources. And the third response is that under our status quo, we are already allowing immigrants to immigrate on a need basis, right? That means that if you need certain immigrants to do jobs that are, for example, difficult to hire people, we allow that under outside the house as well. So we don't think that their benefit that we can attract manpower because there's a manpower shortage is an exclusive benefit that exists on their side of the house. Outside of the house already has that as well. Yes.
All right, so first of all, immigrants come and they usually have a higher birth rate and they can start more families, so you're increasing the birth rate. And also, immigrants are people who make the economy turn, because of who's picking your grapes and stuff like that if it's not for the immigrants.
Well, it is very unclear what kind of loosening immigration policies their side of the house perceived to be. Because on outside of the house, we say that immigrants do occur already. There are a lot of people who want to immigrate to the United States under the status quo, right? So there are already a lot of immigrants under the status quo. We don't need to loosen immigration policy to have sufficient number of immigrants in the United States to give birth to the next generation in the first place. So we don't know where this benefit is going to. So let's move on to our substantive case. So the first principle is that we think that state's primary responsibility to existing citizens. Because existing citizens have already entered into a relationship with the state and hence has already signed a social contract between themselves and the state. State's primary responsibility is to cater to the needs of existing citizens, and especially when resources are finite, for example, job opportunities are finite, social welfare system is finite, we need to prioritize the needs of our existing citizens first. As opposed to state versus non-citizens, because they do not have a pre-existing relationship, we don't see whether there is any basis to assist them and to facilitate the immigration on them in the first place. But the only exception, and as outside the house is proposing, is on a need-based immigration. That means if, for example, a sector needs labor because locally you cannot hire people because there are not insufficient number of people willing to take up this job, you can attract immigrants because it benefits your own citizens. Or for example, a citizen requires a family member to look after, and you can hence allow immigration to allow the family member of your citizens to come to your country to take care of the benefit of the family member. All this because it benefits your own citizens, and it should be the test for deciding whether to allow a citizen to immigrate or not, instead of loosening immigration policies and allowing people to just immigrate. The second idea is that we think that by loosening immigration policy is caused a great problem of scapegoating of immigrants, which are also bad for immigrants themselves. We are talking about developed nations who are under stagnant economic development, overpopulation, energy crisis, and hence the energy crisis, hence the price for energy increases. Exactly, for example, in the United Kingdom, skyrocketing unemployment rate. All this will be exacerbated by loosening immigration policies when you do not screen the threshold for the immigrants that you enter the countries. Because you increase more population and you do not have sufficient jobs for them to take up. So when there are large influx of immigrants, they are so visible as a group in society and are so easily targeted as outsiders, and it is so easy for right-wing politicians and media to scapegoat them for causing the problems that the society faces. But on outside of the house, it is more difficult to demonize immigrants. Why is that? Because number one, we decrease the number of immigrants who do not actually, have been unemployed or need to rely on social welfare, and hence the number of them needing to require society to support them is less, and hence it becomes way more difficult to scapegoat them in the first place. But secondly, the threshold of immigrants are so high when people can see that they are actually only recruiting those who have high knowledge, high assets, and clean record to come to our country and contribute to our country, and it's far more difficult to scapegoat them for all the problems that you have caused to society. The rhetoric that immigrants are stealing our jobs doesn't sound that loud in outside the house. At the end of the opening opposition case, please take away two things. The first thing to take away is that the principle is that state owes the responsibility primarily to existing citizens because he has a pre-existing relationship with citizens. But the second thing to take away is that their side of the house is creating a lot of unemployment and exacerbating a problem that developed nations are facing, especially in terms of economic development and energy crisis. And we think that this motion must fall. Thank you.
The open and closing house, number of government peers.
aid to these developing countries. It is your burden to prove to us why this duty is not enough and why you have to extend that kind of duty.
I think two things. Firstly, it's not justify the personal duty actually move abroad because one thing personally, I would say is the tariffs difference. It's different from like an actual research center in the US that compared to some developmental program that is actually smaller inside your like developing country. But secondly, that I'm going to explain to you why this immigrant policy likely also means progress with economic development within your own country. Right? So moving on to my other extensions. Why is it that we're also getting stressed with better economy on the outside of us? Because within open governance and analysis of economy, if they want to find out practical, it's still benefit to them. Firstly, that we can get better education overall in the developed countries because they're able to recruit, for example, kids from different countries that therefore contribute to the diversity of people. Within that, maybe this person is not necessarily the top 1% in the country in their own country to be able to survive the very strict immigration policy that is imposed on the opposition side. But maybe they can still come to campus and contribute to their education and intellectual discussion as a whole. This is the exact reason why schools like Harvard or like these international very famous colleges are so good because they're able to get talent and diversity comes from all over the world. Right? Secondly, now we think there are likely to be managerial signs between these countries. This is, for example, exchange programs because they also want people in this developing countries to know about the developed countries. And this also means that, for example, how can tech companies recruit more immigrants to contribute to the economy that exists on the outside of the house. This is like, for example, in the EU they have a lot of Western EU countries hire people from Eastern countries, and they also develop funds that are more significant on the outside of the house. This is directly responsible to the POI because this country is, if anything, more large scale on the outside of the house because this makes the developed countries have an incentive to actually implement these policies so that these people can come and contribute to the economy. Right? Thirdly, why is it okay to think people are not allowed to go back to their own country? Why is this actually a good thing? Because this country needs to global equality, and that when they learn, for example, certain technology, and they're able to go back and copy paste this kind of industry that's very innovative, and their own developing country that doesn't exist otherwise on the other side. So we only need to learn certain, like for example, skill set that's not was not provided in your developing country, and with that technology generate a lot of revenue and a lot of industrial change is structural in your own country that is otherwise unlikely on the other side of the house because you actually want these people to have some sort of self-empowerment and self-determination. It's much more efficient than, for example, only giving development programs because they don't allow these people to actually go back and exactly what their own policies and use their own skills to fix these problems. But we think anything, even if they don't learn anything in developed countries, it's not good that they send money back to their hometown because of the currency difference, right? Just you learn like some sort of money for example, in the US, but that translates into a huge amount of money inside Taiwan. This means that when you transfer money back to your own developing country, it also contributes to the economy on both sides and it's rather efficient and very good deal for both sides. Therefore, it's really
We think the previous speaker from the speech, so could it please for closing comments?
We are going to win this debate by proving you from a social and economical point why our solution is better and why they were misrepresenting how migration looks in the status quo, right? A couple of definitions first. We have to go through the actual stakeholders and what they look like, right? We have to look at developed countries which usually have a high cost of living, high wages, and good quality services that are very expensive and are provided to the citizens, right? These developed countries have to represent the people are the main stakeholders. They often have stigma, they often don't want workers, and they often don't have this big expensive growth where you need a lot of workers, right? They only need workers in separate sectors, and this is something that is already tackled in all when we tell you what H1B visas exist, right? Then we go to developing countries, right? They are vice versa. They have a big need for workers, they have a big need for expansion, right? Well, there's not as many opportunities. There is some kind of dream of, okay, I want to migrate to a developed country, which is not necessarily true, right? But what we tell you is that already in the status quo, we have a lot of development funds invested in those, which kind of tackles the principle. And secondly, we tell you that there are other ways that I'm going to present you in a model on how to fix the situation or like tackle the principal point, even like if we acknowledge that, okay, maybe there's a principal connection, right? Secondly, we have to acknowledge how the migrants think, right?
If we have loose restrictions, they're likely to think, okay, this is an easy way in, right? I'm going to go in, I'm likely going to get a job. But this is not actually true, right? This is this idea of an American dream or like ideal immigration that doesn't usually happen, right? Why? Because there's a scarce jobs in developed countries, right? And if there's overflow, which is likely to happen on that side, where you have a lot of people coming in at the same time, they're going to not only fight against the developed country citizens, but also against each other, which is going to mean more shady business. They're going to have to work for illegal lower wages. They're going to not report taxes, which are all like the worst things on that side, right? And then what is likely to happen is there's going to be slums, schools, ghettos, where are likely to form, and there is going to be more expensiveness in fighting crime, and there is going to be a worse quality of life, right? So I'm going to tackle this debate by telling you why for all stakeholders we are worse off on their side, like for developed countries, developing countries, and the migrants and stuff, right? So we first start with the notion that they tackle where they tell you, okay, but developing countries are going to improve, right? They give you two mechanisms for this. Firstly, they tell you, okay, we're going to send them back now, right? I compare that and weigh that with like the person actually staying and educating themselves in like that developing country, right? If the person is able to send money, and if the person was ambitious enough to earn a lot of money, he is likely to earn a lot of money and like not only send a fraction, but like earn that money there, right? We tell you that multinational companies still exist, like high-paying jobs still exist even in developing countries, right? And there is more need for jobs, and it is easier for a migrant to get a job in their country than compared to America, where like there exists stigma, etc., etc. So it's harder to get those jobs just because of stigma, just because of lack of education, right? We tell you that developing countries will still likely have jobs and will still likely be able to have big pay, which is going to be a bigger proportion, right? Secondly, they tell you that they are going to back if they succeed, right? We tell you that this is not likely to happen. They're not going to transfer all the funds back, because if they live a perfect life and if they actually succeed, if they are 1 in a million who succeeded as a migrant, they're likely going to stay in developed countries. There is no impact on developing countries. We are going to prove you better events, right? So what is the mechanism that we get, right? We recognize two problems. We first recognize that there is a low birth rate, and this is something that we have to tackle to get more domestic jobs, right? We tell you that the OO largely goes like uninterrupted by the government side, where they tell you that basically, okay, the domestic citizens are going to fulfill that better. So increasing the birth rate is just better because of integration and because they're going to be culturally appropriated, they're going to be better educated, right? So we tell you that if we can increase the birth rate, we can win, right? But second way of winning this debate is if we like forget about the principle, like just not try to attack it, right? Let's say that countries really do like have the moral obligation and the principal obligation to like help those countries, right? We tell you that this already is tackled with developing programs. This is already tackled with multinational companies, and this is likely going to be tackled if we take the resources that they have to use to give their solution and like put even more resources into developmental funds, etc., etc., right? Why are they likely to use a lot of resources to that side? Firstly, because they want to implement a lot of checks and balances to prevent crime. Secondly, because they are going to have to support a lot more social welfare, because we tell you there is going to be a lot less job vacancies, there is going to be a lot more jobless people and homeless people, because that notion of the regime is likely not going to work out for everyone, right? And because we tell you that there is going to be a large amount of social and money capital spent on that side, we tell you that capital can be used in another way, which is a model, right? So they tell you that, okay, we're born in a global lottery, we have to contribute to developing countries. This is the way we do it, right? We wait often, we say there's another way to do it, especially because in my argument, in my positive, I'm going to tell you why this solution also harms the country, right? And by this, we basically tackle the entire extension, the closing government. It gives you a big value that the opening government is going to be directly compared to positive material, right? But how do we weigh over this debate, right? We tell you that we are going to bring you unique positive impacts that tell you that there is not only negative impacts on like the country, but also on developing countries and only for the also for the migrants, right? So first unique argument is preventing negative impacts, right? We tell you that we're going to prevent discrimination, crime, and slums and jobless if we actually have this framework. Why? Because if we have H-1B visas, we tell you that they're likely going to have to report their income in order to stay with the visa, meaning that they're going to also likely have a plan, right? If you get this visa, you need a plan, you need a job offer to get into the country, you need to be in that special field that really needs a job, right? Therefore, the analysis of me not getting a job and being jobless is not likely to happen. Only with specialized work visas I'm going to get a job, right? And I say that I'm going to pay taxes, which is going to prevent homelessness. Now, right? With this mechanism, we prevent an overflow of people who actually don't have jobs, right? Secondly, on entrepreneurship point, right? Their case also like is contingent on them being more entrepreneurial, right? We tell you that this is not likely because their entrepreneurship skills or like their ideas are not necessarily going to work out, right? A lot of them own a dream without plan, without funding, and don't succeed. A lot of companies run by immigrants in America are just gas stations or like cheap delis, etc., which is not likely what they want. to achieve it is not likely what gives them prosperity and happiness. This is on a comparative they could achieve something better even in their country, right? It's better to live in like high standard in a low wage country than a low standard in a very high wage country where you have to resort to crime, etc. Right? Secondly, we tell you that our second argument is that this safeguard and acknowledge citizens. Right? Not only principally should the country acknowledge citizens, but also we give them a better welfare, we give them more jobs, and we don't like achieve this discrimination against immigrants. Right? Our third argument is how their side has a negative effect on global development. Right? Because they have brain drain from those developing countries to developed countries, and because we tell you that money sending back is not likely to work, right? And we tell you that because they need rapid expansion, they need a lot of jobs, they are developing countries that necessarily goes off on that, right? And then benefit of migrants, the most important stakeholders in the debate. I already tell you that expectations are likely not to work out because there's just an overflow, more supply than demand, therefore they're going to have to resort to illegal. And we tell you that they have to plan on our side, therefore they're going to get a good job, therefore implementation and integration is likely to be better because if they're going to be economically able to provide for themselves, they're better off. And because you prove it that we are better off for the migrants, we are better off for the developing country, and we're better off for the citizens of developed, we win this debate. Thank you.
If anyone else needs to go to the toilet, now would be the time. If no one else needs to go to the toilet, that's the best way.
Do they get extra points if they come out?
By the way, since every speaker here has a representative, could we get the speaker order, please?
Michael is PM. Johan's the other guy.
Who went the other guy? All right.
And Lawrence speak first. Anthony second.
All right, great. Now that I have everyone back, to close out the case for Dr. Bench, Dr. here.
In my speech today, I'll firstly be rebutting the opening house and later two closing houses. Firstly, OO states that they put an entire country in danger. I think this is quite a stupid line, right? This is completely racist. How can OO come up with a line saying that immigrants are all dangerous? I think there's a criminal cases all around the world, with or without immigrants policies. There's so much biases coming from OO, right? Just look at gun shootings in America. Most of them are come from local Americans. I don't think you can blame all the criminal cases just because they lose an immigrant policy, right? A lot of the labor-based jobs are done because of labor. Additionally, there are a lot of highly educated immigrants that contribute to the economics of the country and our country overall as well, right? It's unclear how and why did they come up with this line. And besides listening, I think migration policy doesn't mean that we don't want any policies. We won't let criminals come into the country at the end of the day, right? Secondly, they talk about cultural divides and immigrants can fit in. I think that happens on both sides of the house. No, losing a gender policy, it happens on both sides of the house. It's symmetrical, right? Cultural discrimination, in fact, comes from the line putting the entire country in danger. I think it's more likely to happen in their house because the only immigrants developing countries are the richer and the smarter ones, which are being criticized of stealing the local job, right? I think our side is better because people see that they can actually done better things compared to stealing richest people's job, right? So just told you that plans will also be followed, such prior to immigrants coming to the country, right? Thirdly, they talked about jobs will be replaced by human. I think this is way on like time frame, right? In the short term, I don't think any technology will be that advanced that these technologies are able to take away people's or laborers' careers, right? But for the long term, I think for the long term, it's all probably gonna take decades of years, right? The reason why loosening migration is a topic nowadays is because they do need these people to build houses. And adding on that, I think if you're able to accept more immigrants, you're also able to give them citizenship, which is another reason why they are also under the protection of labor law, right? What we argue is that the developed countries know that when to stop or when to extend the migration policy, right? Developing countries, they have developed supervision systems such as the Parliament that can actually supervise the population of the country accepting immigrants, right? But I think they're being like supervised by the general public, right? I think the process is likely to be very transparent. Like no matter the process of regulations, will be transparent as well. No, CO, I think they never engage with our principal argument, right? I think they argue about like fighting local citizens. Immigrants nowadays are quite careful because there's already a narrative talking about like they need to be careful, otherwise they'll be kicked out of the country. But then secondly, I think immigrants nowadays do have a dream to work or track hard in developed countries. And also talked about like development aid. I think development aid is not enough in this status quo, right? Developed countries don't give a fuck about developing countries in the very first place. But secondly, I think this is not efficient in the first place, right? If you want to spend so much to do development aid in the